My name is Aubrey Sinclair. I'm 31, and the last place anyone expected to find me was the back pew of my sister's wedding at the Ashford Estate in Charlottesville, Virginia, sitting alone in a dress I bought on clearance at Target, while she stood at the altar in $4,000 worth of lace that our parents paid for. She spotted me the moment I slipped through the side door. She didn't wave. She turned back to the mirror her bridesmaids were holding up and smiled at her own reflection like I wasn't there. My brother-in-law leaned into the microphone during the reception toast and said it loud enough for 200 guests to hear. Some people in this family have always needed to be carried. Good thing the rest of us have strong enough backs. He paused. Laughter came from the tables closest to the stage. My father raised his champagne glass. My mother touched her pearl necklace and smiled at the floor. I sat with my hands in my lap until a woman in a gray blazer I didn't recognize slid into the empty chair beside me, pressed a sealed envelope against my palm, and said quietly, "Don't sign anything tonight. Not one word. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far this reaches. Every morning I'm up at 5:15. Not because I want to be. The alarm on my phone, the cracked screen one I've had for 3 years, goes off before the sky even thinks about turning pink. I pull on scrubs, eat whatever's in the fridge standing at the counter, and drive 40 minutes to Mercy General in my 2014 Civic that shudders every time I take it above 65 on the highway. I've been a registered nurse in the cardiac ICU for 6 years. 12-hour shifts, rotating days and nights, holidays included. Last Thanksgiving I held a man's hand while he went into cardiac arrest because his family hadn't made it in time. Last Christmas Eve I worked a double because 2 nurses called out sick and there was nobody else. I make $58,000 a year before taxes, which sounds like more than it is when you subtract rent in Northern Virginia, student loans, car insurance, and the occasional bag of groceries that doesn't come from the discount rack. My apartment is a 1-bedroom in a complex off Route 7. The carpets are beige, the walls are off-white. There's a water stain on the bathroom ceiling shaped like the state of Florida that my landlord has been promising to fix since March. I cook most of my own food because restaurants add up fast, and I keep a running list on a notepad on the fridge of what needs to be replaced before it runs out. Rice, eggs, the good coffee that I buy in bulk when it goes on sale. My sister wakes up whenever she feels like it in the house our parents bought her in McLean. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a kitchen with quartz countertops she picked out herself. Her husband, the one with the toast, runs a consulting firm that pulls in somewhere north of $400,000 a year. She doesn't work, which is fine, except that she describes herself at dinner parties as an entrepreneur because she has an Etsy shop she opened 2 years ago that has made, to my knowledge, 11 sales. My parents forward her press releases from local business blogs like she's building something that matters. The family group chat has her face in it every other day. My mom sends heart emojis whenever she posts on Instagram. My father flies down to visit them twice a year. I haven't gotten a call on my birthday from either of them that lasted longer than 4 minutes in the last 3 years. And one of those years, my father called the wrong number first and had to call back. 14 months ago, the hospital had a mass casualty event. A highway pileup, 43 patients, 6 of them critical. I was the charge nurse on duty. We had 4 doctors available and a waiting room that looked like a scene from a disaster film. I made the call to redirect 2 non-critical patients to the step-down unit so we could keep the trauma bays clear. I coordinated triage for 11 hours straight, flagged a missed internal bleed on a patient that 2 residents had cleared, and kept 2 people alive long enough for surgery to open up. One of them was a 16-year-old girl. She sent me a card 4 months later with a photo of herself at her high school graduation, smiling in a blue cap and gown. I kept the card in my locker at work. I never mentioned it at home. What would have been the point? They would have called it just doing your job, which technically it was, and then redirected the conversation back to my sister's Etsy shop or my brother-in-law's latest conference in Scottsdale. My Aunt Rosalind found out anyway. She lives in Roanoke, works as a social worker for the county, drives a 10-year-old Subaru, and calls me every Sunday without fail at 7 in the evening. She heard about the pileup on the local news and called that Monday morning before my shift. "That was you, wasn't it?" she said. It wasn't a question. The charge nurse they mentioned. I told her it was a team effort. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "You don't have to be modest with me, Aubrey. I know what that night cost you." I didn't say anything to that. She sent me a care package the following week. Good tea, a pair of compression socks, a handwritten note that said simply, "For the one who shows up." I wore the socks through 3 night shifts. I never told my parents she'd sent them. The wedding invitation came 6 weeks before the date. Cream cardstock, gold embossing, the venue name in a font I had to squint to read. My sister's name, her husband's name, a date in June. At the bottom, in smaller print, black tie preferred. I stood at my kitchen counter for a long time holding it. I knew what I was being invited to perform. Not to celebrate. To be present as the contrast, the cautionary tale. The one in the clearance dress who proved by comparison how well the rest of them had done. My brother-in-law texted me the following Thursday. "Actually, you probably shouldn't come. It's a formal event and we don't want any awkwardness." That was the whole message. No punctuation at the end. I went anyway. Aunt Rosalind said, "Go if you want, but know your own worth before you walk in the door." I printed out the directions and ironed my dress the night before. The Ashford estate sits on 40 acres outside Charlottesville. White columns, a long gravel drive lined with boxwoods, a tent on the south lawn big enough to fit 200 chairs and a band. I arrived 20 minutes after the ceremony started and found a seat near the back. Aunt Rosalind was already there. She'd driven up from Roanoke that morning, and she caught my eye from 2 rows over and gave me a small nod. The ceremony was beautiful in the way expensive things usually are. Flowers I couldn't name, a string quartet, my sister crying perfectly on cue. My parents sat in the front row, my father in a tux I'd never seen before, my mother in a dress that cost more than my monthly rent. I know because she'd told me the price over the phone, the way you tell someone a price when you want them to feel the distance. The reception moved to the tent. Round tables with candles and low arrangements of white roses, a band setting up near the back. Past appetizers I ate 2 of before a server took the tray away. I found my place card. I'd been seated at table 14, the far corner near the emergency exit, next to my sister's college roommate's husband, who spent 45 minutes telling me about his fantasy football team. When the toast started, my brother-in-law took the microphone from the MC and held it the way men do when they're used to being listened to. He talked about ambition. He talked about building a life. He talked about the people who rise and the people who stay comfortable where they are. "Some people in this family have always needed to be carried," he said, eyes moving across the tent until they found me. "Good thing the rest of us have strong enough backs." The tables near the stage laughed. My father raised his glass. My mother touched her necklace. Heat moved up the back of my neck. I kept my face still. 200 people in that tent, and I could feel a dozen sets of eyes angling toward table 14 to see how I'd take it. Then my father stood up. He didn't wait to be called to the microphone. He walked up and took it from my brother-in-law's hand and cleared his throat. He talked about legacy. He talked about what it meant to see a child succeed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document and held it up. "To celebrate this marriage and this new chapter," he said, "your mother and I are transferring the deed to the Shenandoah property into your names today." He gestured toward the screen they'd set up beside the band where a projection showed an image of a sprawling property in the valley. 40 acres, a farmhouse, a barn, a creek cutting through the south field. Property I knew existed, property I'd been told was for the whole family someday. Appraised at $2.3 million the last time it came up in conversation. My mother stepped forward and handed my sister a small wooden box. "And a discretionary trust we've been building since you were born, $400,000, released to you both today." Applause. My sister pressed her hands to her face and cried again, this time less perfectly. My father looked toward table 14. "Aubrey," he said, "we'd like you to come up here." His voice was even. "We have some paperwork for you as well, a formalization, to clarify the estate structure going forward. Simple housekeeping." He held out a single sheet. I understood what it was before I reached the stage. I'd seen enough legal documents in my life to recognize the shape of a relinquishment. This one asked me to waive any claim to the Shenandoah property, the trust, and any remaining estate assets, formalizing what they were already doing informally, in front of 200 witnesses, so there would be no question later. My brother-in-law stood to the side with his arms crossed, watching. My sister examined her nails. My mother had turned slightly away, as if this part of the evening was a logistical detail she preferred not to make eye contact with. I walked up the aisle between tables. The carpet was thick, champagne-colored. My shoes made no sound. Guests watched without talking. A man near the aisle caught my eye and looked away. My father handed me a pen. Black, heavy, the kind with a real clip. The paper was on a small podium beside the projection screen. My sister's name in the document, my brother-in-law's name. My name at the bottom with a signature line and a notary block. I held the pen. Aunt Rosalind had risen halfway from her seat at the edge of the tent. I could see her in my peripheral vision. She sat back down, slowly. My hand moved toward the paper. The tip of the pen touched the signature line. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her husband and whispered something. The tent's side entrance opened behind me. A woman stepped in. Late 60s, silver hair pulled back, a dark suit, a leather satchel over one shoulder. She walked with the kind of deliberate steadiness that takes up space without rushing. I didn't know her. Several people near the entrance did. I could tell by the way conversations dropped off as she passed. She stopped at the foot of the stage. "I apologize for the interruption," she said, and she didn't sound sorry at all. "My name is Helen Marsh. I was your grandmother's attorney for 22 years. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace. My father's jaw set hard." Helen Marsh set her satchel on an empty chair and opened it with 2 clean snaps. "Aubrey Sinclair passed away 3 years ago," she said, addressing the room. "And at the time of her passing, a will was filed with the Albemarle County Circuit Court. A copy was delivered to the family, as required. That copy was subsequently destroyed." She paused. "We know this because 2 members of the household staff provided written statements, which are filed with the court." She lifted a folder sealed with a notary stamp. "This is the certified duplicate." A sound moved through the tent. Not quite a gasp, more like the moment before one. My father stepped forward. "This is not the time or place. I believe the timing was chosen for you, not by me," Helen said, and something in her tone made him stop. She pulled a tablet from the satchel and set it on a stand she brought with her. A video began to play on the screen behind the stage, replacing the projection of the Shenandoah property. My grandmother appeared. She was seated in the armchair by the window in her house in Charlottesville, the one with the gardenia on the sill that she replanted every spring. She looked thinner than the last time I'd seen her, but her eyes were the same. Clear and direct. "If you're watching this," she said, "it means I'm gone. And it means someone is trying to rewrite what I put in place." She folded her hands in her lap. "Aubrey shows up. She has always shown up. Not for credit, not for recognition, but because it is in her nature to do the work that needs doing and ask for nothing afterward. I have watched her do this her entire life, and I have decided that this is exactly the character that should be trusted with what I leave behind." She looked directly into the camera. "The property, the trust, and everything attached to it goes to Aubrey. No conditions, no delays, no family vote." She paused once. "I love all of you. But love and inheritance are different instruments. I am using the right one." The clip ended. The tent was silent in a way I had never experienced in a room with 200 people. Not quiet, silent. Aunt Rosalind was on her feet. "That is my mother's will," she said, her voice carrying clean and clear across the tent. "You sat on it for 3 years." She pointed at my father. 3 years. My father turned to her. "Rosalind, this is not. Don't. Just the one word." She sat back down. Helen was already reading. "The will transferred the Shenandoah property, all 40 acres, the farmhouse, the barn, the water rights to me. The discretionary trust, $400,000 to me. A secondary account my grandmother had kept separately, $180,000, also to me. A clause at the end, if any family member attempted to coerce a signature or misrepresent the estate structure, an additional $75,000 penalty trust would activate immediately, payable to the primary beneficiary." Helen looked up from the document. "The coercion clause," she said, "activates upon any documented attempt to obtain a signature through misrepresentation of legal standing." She looked at the podium, at the piece of paper still sitting there with the pen resting across the signature line. "We documented this evening's proceedings beginning at 8:47 p.m. She gestured toward a small camera on a tripod near the entrance that I'd mistaken for a wedding photographer's setup. My brother-in-law's voice came from the side of the stage. "This is staged," he said. "This is completely fabricated." His voice was higher than it had been during the toast. "She's been planning this. She set this up." He looked around the tent for agreement and found mostly phones raised to record. My father reached for the tablet. Helen pulled it back without looking at him. My sister hadn't spoken. She was standing very still near the floral arch the decorators had built at the edge of the stage, the one that had been there for photos, and she was staring at the empty projection screen where our grandmother's face had been. A man in the front row, I would find out later he was a partner at a firm my brother-in-law had been courting for a contract, stood up and asked, loudly, "Has the estate executor been properly notified of these proceedings?" His colleague beside him was already on the phone. Helen stacked her documents in order, each page tabbed and labeled. "Every piece of this is filed with the probate court in Albemarle County," she said. "The will is valid, witnessed, notarized, and has been on record for 3 years. The coercion clause, as of tonight, transfers an additional $75,000 to Aubrey Sinclair, effective at the close of business Monday." She closed the satchel. "Any attempt to contest will extend proceedings and add legal costs to the contesting parties." My brother-in-law moved toward her. 2 men near the front, Helen's associates I realized, stepped forward without a word. He stopped. My father stood at the center of the stage with his arms at his sides and his champagne glass still in his hand. He looked old in a way I hadn't noticed before, or maybe I had noticed and hadn't let myself hold on to it. I let the pen drop from my fingers. It rolled off the podium and hit the carpet without a sound. "I'm going home," I said. My voice came out steady. I hadn't planned that. I was grateful for it. I looked at my parents once, just once, and then I walked back down the aisle between the tables, past the guests with their phones and their whispers, through the tent side entrance and out into the Virginia night where the air smelled like cut grass and the boxwoods and something blooming I couldn't name. Aunt Rosalind caught up with me at the car. We drove to a diner off the highway and ordered coffee and eggs and didn't talk about the tent for the first 20 minutes. Then she said, "Your grandmother told me 2 years ago she made me promise not to say anything until it was time." I stirred my coffee. Was tonight the time? She smiled at her plate. Apparently. 6 months later, the Shenandoah property had a new roof on the farmhouse and a signed lease with a local conservation group that manages the land in exchange for reduced grazing fees. The creek on the south field had been cleared of debris. In the mornings when I drive out there on my days off, the light comes through the tree line along the eastern fence in a way that I have not found words for yet. I still work at Mercy General. I asked for a transfer to the education department, where I help train new nurses in critical care protocols. The 16-year-old from the pileup, now 17, sent me a message in January asking if I thought nursing was a good career. I told her what I actually thought, which is that it is hard and underpaid, and the kind of work that gets into you so deep you can't separate it from who you are. She said that sounded right to her. I told her to apply. The family group chat went quiet after the wedding. My mother texted me once, 6 weeks later, to ask if I wanted to come for Thanksgiving. I read the message and set the phone down and picked it up again 4 hours later and typed that I would think about it. I haven't answered yet. I'm not sure I need to hurry. My brother-in-law is no longer with the consulting firm. The partner who stood up at the wedding declined to renew the contract. There were questions about billing practices that the firm chose not to pursue publicly. He's been consulting independently since October. The Etsy shop has 16 sales now. Aunt Rosalind comes to the property on the second Sunday of every month. We walk the fence line and check on the creek, and she tells me about her cases without using names, and I tell her about the nurses I'm training, and she listens the way she has always listened, which is like she has always listened, which is like she has nowhere else to be. We make coffee on the farmhouse stove and drink it on the porch while the light shifts and the field does whatever it does in a particular season we're in. My grandmother used to say that character is what you do when the outcome isn't clear yet. I think about that when I'm standing at the fence in the early morning, looking at the 40 acres she left me, knowing she was watching long before any of it came to light. The pen is still on the Ashford Estates champagne carpet, as far as I know. I never picked it back up.